a gentleman who is a remarkable career in music. And not just rock and roll. He's done a lot of things. Frank has done what? Ballet, all kinds of material. What?
Even classical.
Yeah, classical stuff. Frank Zappa is with us tonight. Fascinating. A young actor from... Okay, my next guest, I'm sure you all know. Frank Zappa is certainly one of the most prolific music composers of this generation, and although most people associate him with rock and roll, the London Symphony has recorded an album of his music. He's written a book called Them or Us, and his latest album is called Frank Zappa Meets the Mothers of Prevention. Would you welcome, please, Mr. Frank Zappa? Simmer down, folks. I was going to say, please welcome a national treasure, Frank Zappa. Somebody said that you had a couple experiences with that where they introduced you that way.
Yeah, well, that started off as a joke. I did the Roberta Weintraub show. I don't know whether you get up early enough to watch that.
Yeah,
but
I've seen it.
When I was on the show, they said, well, how would you like to be introduced? And I said, well, just introduce me as a national treasure. And they thought, well, yeah, sure. And so when they did it, the slide went on the screen and said, National Treasurer.
National Treasurer?
Yeah. So then a few weeks ago, I taped a panel discussion about censorship, which is coming on another network this Sunday. And they said the same thing. Well, how do you want to be introduced? And I said, well, National Treasure. And they were incensed that I would say this. You know, I thought, well, you know, why not give them a bad time?
Exactly.
Prior to taping the thing, they were pleading with me to change my introduction, and I said, no, National Treasure, National Treasure. And I can't remember the name of the woman who was the moderator of the discussion, but when it finally went before the camera, she said, well, Frank Zappa, who is asked to be introduced as a national treasure, but we know he's just a musician. No, it wasn't really that bad.
I have a feeling you get a great kick of putting people on. Right?
Yeah.
And giving them, you know...
You and me both.
Especially nice, straight people, and they just take it and twist it a little bit.
Yeah.
You haven't been on with me before.
That's true.
Yeah. You were here...
There's probably a very good reason for that.
Why?
Well, I don't know. It's, I think that sometimes shows of this magnitude tend to not want to have people who say the kind of stuff that I do sitting, on the show.
Oh, not a bit. On the contrary.
Yeah.
Yeah, I find you fascinating, and I respect your opinions. I told you before the show... with that testimony in front of the committee on censorship of rock lyrics predominantly, I thought it was one of the most fascinating television I'd ever seen. You were there, John Denver was there.
Dee Snider.
Dee Snider from Twisted Sister.
Stan Gordikoff.
You want to get into that a little bit because it is so current. As you know, there was a coalition or a committee of I guess Washington wives who wanted to, as I understand it, or were trying to get lyrics censored or make record artists more aware of what they were saying. Saying, in effect, I guess, that the lyrics were morally wrong, were bad for the youngsters to hear, and et cetera, and et cetera. Mm. And you went on and talked about that a little bit.
Yeah, they actually said things that were more far-reaching than that. Some of their unscientific conclusions were that rock music will make you commit suicide, that rock music leads people to become murderers. Some people have said that rock music is the major cause of incest in the home, that rock music will... This is an actual quote from one person. I was trying to give you an update backstage, but it was a little fast. The PMRC business that you're referring to in the Senate was last year. That was the beginning,
right?
Okay? And it didn't quit. It didn't go away. Mm-hmm. This year's manifestation began with a law that was introduced in the state of Maryland, which passed through the House of Delegates 96 to something, just whizzed right through before anybody thought about it. They took the existing pornography laws as they apply to motion pictures and books and videotapes and just added the words magnetic tape, phonograph record, and compact disc to include this gives you the legal concept that music can be pornographic, which I think is stupid. And the law itself...
Is anybody ever given a definition of pornography that makes sense to everyone?
Well, I don't know whether that has ever happened, but in the case of the Maryland law, it had some definitions built into it that applied to the visual medium. And some of them were really strange. Like, for example, it said that the purpose of the bill was to keep people from seeing or experiencing illicit sex. And then it goes on to define what in Maryland is described as illicit sex. And the first thing on the list was sexual intercourse.
That's illicit.
In the state of Maryland, apparently. So by implication, if you add phonograph records to this law, that would mean that the record can't talk about illicit sex or sexual intercourse.
Right.
So when you see that most of the love songs that have ever been written are generally aiming in that direction, and most people didn't die from that, it's going to be a little complicated. The other thing that the law forbids is advertising pornography. So that gives you a legal situation where if the law, which was defeated yesterday, 7-4, if the law would have gone into effect, a kid wearing a T-shirt with the name of a group on it that had been judged pornographic would then be liable for a $1,000 fine and a year in jail for advertising pornography.
Something is strange here.
Yeah.
Let me interrupt you a second, Frank. We have to cut away. We'll do this, but we'll be right back.
Okay.
I hope you don't mind getting into this, are you? We're back talking with Frank Zappa. You know, we only have a short time tonight. I'd love you to come back again some night, but we got a couple of minutes here, and we're going to talk about a lot of other things. But this is rather, I think, important, because once you start censoring phonograph records, it's not a long step before you start to censor almost anything. And community standards is a difficult thing to explain at best. You know, what is offensive to one person is not offensive to other, and people ought to have a freedom of choice. But I guess they say because children are involved here, that they're more impressionable. And yet I've seen a lot of kids who listen to these records stand up and say, well, you know, it's just a record. It's our music, our time, no big deal.
I think that to talk about this matter and pin it to children and use the children as a tool in order to sell this political device, because I think there's a political concept behind shutting off access to certain types of information. If you can put your foot in the door by saying, we're going to stop dirty words, that literally means you put in force the mechanism to stop other ideas. Once that censorship board is there, they have to find things for themselves to do when they run out of dirty words, and they're not going to unemploy themselves.
Yeah.
And so,
All right, let me ask you, let me play like one of the Devil's Advocate. I'll play that for a second. The mother says to you, but don't you think, Mr. Zappa, that musicians today who have, who are in front of youngsters all the time have a moral right to not express certain things on records, that you must be careful of what you write and what you play?
well, I think that an artist's responsibility is to himself as an artist, and there is plenty of other forms of music besides rock and roll that people can listen to. Like I said in the Senate, there's instrumental music, which has no words. Why don't you try and interest children in listening to musicians? You know, you don't have to hear lyrics.
Yeah, freedom of choice is not a bad thing. We'll take a break. We'll be right back. Good, I think we made it. We are back. We just have a few seconds here. My apologies to Mark Lindsay Chapman. We've asked Mark if he can be with us in a week or so at his schedule, and he said he could, so I'm sorry about that. Anyway, I'm sorry we had such a short time, too. Would you come back some other night? We'll get into a lot of other areas.
Sure, no problem.
Really, it's nice to meet you. Congratulations. So tomorrow night, we have Charles Grodin will be here, Yakov Smirnoff, and Katrina and the Waves. Thank you. We'll see you tomorrow.
Next on Late Night with David Letterman, a look at viewer mail and comedian Jeff Altman. Then start your day with NBC News at sunrise. And tomorrow morning on Today, a talk with Marlo Thomas.